Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema, and in anticipation for Dune Part 2, we are going to be talking about Children of Dune, the miniseries, as we lead up watching all the Dune movies and miniseries up to that movie. So let me know down in the comments below if you have seen the Children of Dune miniseries. What do you think about it? And are you anticipating the release of Dune Part 2 if you haven't gotten a chance to see an early release already? So make sure to comment down below and make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Help me reach my goal on this channel to reach 500 subscribers of people that just love watching movies and just love the art of cinema. By going into the review itself, into the positive, I just really appreciate what this film has to offer. It's a follow-up to the Dune miniseries, and yet for some reason it is the third book in the franchise of the books themselves, and so they're skipping Dune Messiah for whatever reason. I am a big fan of the first Dune movie and the book itself, but unfortunately, I have no knowledge of anything past that just yet, and yet this miniseries may have the inspiration to change it. Just generally enjoying the aspect of the story, the unfamiliarity with having read something before going into what the story was going to, and generally the story takes 12 years after the first Dune movie. And what this story has to offer, just going into the different characters, into the lives, focusing on the children of Paul Atreides and just other people involved with that, how the aftermath of Dune has led to this. And unfortunately, we missed the middle ground with Dune Messiah, and I generally don't know what happens in between, but for this story alone, I didn't feel completely lost. Just generally focusing on Paul Atreides becoming this king that's kind of lost in this sort of way where some people are putting threats against him, as he's not really putting all the care he has been into being the Muad'Dib as he once was that beloved king back then. And so generally the atmosphere is different. You're establishing characters that haven't been there before, especially with Leto and Ganya, his children, and what they do with those characters. Taking this into a 3-part miniseries builds up upon each other, where there's cliffhangers at the end of part 1 and part 2 that really work effectively for the narrative itself. What they have to do with those characters, what they're doing with Alia's character, the sister of Paul Atreides, and how they build up a story that's very different and yet still grounded within the still realm and setting of the Dune franchise. And I just enjoy what this story had to offer, becoming unfamiliar with where it was going to lead up to, and just what they do with Paul's character being someone that's more lost and sort of goes off on his own at certain times, and how they establish different characters, establishing villains that I'm not necessarily going to spoil outright, but how they bring back characters from the past in ways that I didn't expect, even ones that are dead. It just introduces new ideas, what that has to mean for the current setting, and how they involve the characters as they were, and changes within the characters that we see them now. Just seeing the riots on the street, how we have to fix the problems of maintaining order within the society as different things are done with the spice, and different things are done with how things are trying to take over another planet, trying to invade, and how they do that is clever, because it doesn't feel like the whole invasion sequence that we see at the end of Dune, to where they're replaying events. It introduces the new characters to provide new sequences that goes about different ways of being clever with how it's telling its craft, and enjoying what the technical details provides, even for its time. Because if you've seen my past review over the Dune miniseries, I was kind of skeptical on how well the technical look of it looked for its time. I was appreciative for how well they were pulling it off, even if it wasn't looking very appealing. But this way, just releasing 3 years after that miniseries pulls off the technological CGI in a much better way, to where it's not perfect. Obviously, it's still experimental in 2003, but it still lands on its own feet much better than the other one did. It looks much more appealing to look at, which is much more sufficient for what this story has to offer, because the visuals of what the Dune franchise means add so much more to the themes that this story still delivers on, because it is a heavy sci-fi drama. It is political by its own means, and delivers on visuals that ultimately you want to be in awe of, because of how deeply well thought out the story is, from the very text of the book to putting it on screen. Makes it that much more effective when it is visually appealing. And how they use the powers that they give Leto is really clever, that I wouldn't spoil within this review, that is really innovative to the craft of how this supersedes the story itself. And while some of it could be a little bit too advanced for how they're doing it, it still lands well, surprises me, especially for not being familiar with the craft. But even if I was familiar with the story, I would still be surprised by how well they pull it off. The visual look isn't perfect, but for its time, it is really surprising what they have to offer, how well it is effectively played off, and even bringing back characters such as Duke Leto and Baron Harkonnen in ways that you just don't quite expect to be shown in a story where they're long past. It's just the appearance of those characters, what they have to offer to this story as their respective roles, it being the same sort of characteristics that they had in the first film or the book in general. It's very satisfying for what they pull off at the end of the day. Maybe going into the negatives, some of the pacing was a little off. Maybe that's partly because I'm less familiar with this story than I was from having read the first book. And so just the general appeal to it is a little lost, having to essentially binge this. It's nearly 5 hours, which it's a shorter story in text than what the first book is. And so I don't know how much more was included, how much is extended more than it needs to be, or if it does work well for the sufficient 5 hours, even though it's equal to the first book, the first miniseries that we had to offer. They're both the same lengths, and for having a shorter book, I'm wondering how that works out. But I still enjoyed the film generally, especially in significant parts that really stood out to be its own thing. And so it really took its time, which was good, but also in a negative gesture that I don't know if it needed to be 5 hours, even if many of the sequences were sufficient for my taste of what it had to offer for the story. That's generally what is good about these Dune stories, for its world building. And there's certain characters as well throughout that don't always appeal to me as much. The way they choose to pull off certain sequences or certain ideas that generally can't be foretold right now within the spoiler-free review, but generally what they have to offer for this film, it can be a bit too much at times for how they choose to appropriate certain characters in certain places. And of course, with the CGI, the effectiveness of the blue within blue eyes for the Fremen is much better, given the advancement from the Dune miniseries from the first one, and putting it into actual eye contact is much more effective, but certain characters don't always deliver on the performances or the lines. And so just generally, this story does have a few hiccups along the way, but it surprised me in many more ways than I would have expected. So that's just my review and takes on the Children of Dune miniseries as we lead up to Dune Part 2. Let me know down in the comments below if you have seen the Children of Dune miniseries. Did you like it, or did it end up on the lower end of what you think it is like? And especially comment down below if you have seen or read the book itself and how well it holds up to the on-screen performance of what this story delivers on. So that's just all. Make sure to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, help me reach my goal of 500 subscribers here on this channel, and make sure to like this video and go do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.